What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Sometimes in the vast world of Pokemon, we get a creature that has a bit more potential, and only a while later does that come to fruition with a new evolution or perhaps a regional form, and we can all celebrate their good fortune. However, other times a Pokemon is sitting there waiting for this benediction from on high, only to just keep on waiting. Granted, in more time we could see this fixed, but there are still some clear connections between Pokemon that have yet to be officially recognized, so let's go through and highlight some Pokemon that should really be relatives, since if Applin has shown us anything, you never know when some serious renovations might fall into your lap. But I want to start out by saying we're not just going to focus on the obvious ones like Alomomola, Bouffalant, or Turtonator. As much as I would love Eviolite Torkoal, I don't think it quite needs a family to the degree that some of these others do. That being said, the most obvious or expected one that I'll cover here is Seviper, being related to the Ekans line, because I really can see it. I'm not saying that we can't have more than one snake Pokemon, because they're usually pretty good, and it's not like we don't have multiple fish Pokemon. However, water-type fish is expected, whereas snakes are not inherently poison-type, or at least not purely so. Seviper easily could have been poison and dark, maybe, but the fact that it was mono-poison type made everyone instantly link it back to the original toxic snakes that we had known for years. I mean, Ekans evolving into Arbok was given a major focus in the original season of the anime, and made an impression on millions. So when you have another vicious serpent that's solely characterized by its deadly venom, we're all going to wonder how it's different enough to warrant its separate status. That's not to say that the giant fangs and bladed tail aren't enough, but also, isn't that exactly what evolution is for? You could even keep its rivalry with Zangoose and say this constant antagonism is what triggered its need to change into a more violent form. That'd be perfect, or at this point, I would even take having Seviper as a branched evolution directly from Ekans that uses the Dawnstone or something. It's not like we haven't seen a late edition gender-specific evolution before, so having that be the case for Seviper and the Ekans line would have been great. And them being a Hoenn Pokemon maybe even could have set the precedent that we get new evolutions for every generation. But while we're talking about the Dawnstone, I do have to bring up another option I think would be pretty perfect with Swanna. This water-dwelling fowl is arguably nothing special. I mean, I appreciate it because I actually got to use one, but it's just not all that exciting in a game filled with magical dragon myths. So it would make this random bird a lot more interesting if it were a branched evolution off of Psyduck. Everybody knows Psyduck and Golduck from back in the day, and pretty much every game since, but I think they could all benefit from being tied together. I don't have a vendetta against Ducklet or anything, but there was really no need to create it when there was already a sort of plain duck in the Pokemon roster. You could argue that they wanted to do an ugly Ducklet thing, but they didn't even make it that ugly, so they failed in that regard, meaning that Psyduck could have gotten a boost and received some outside attention for its ever-present appearances, and actually could have gained the flying type. Whereas Swanna, instead of just being another random bland entry in the water flying type that was already getting crowded, would warrant its own existence by being a natural development from a Pokemon line that's been well established. So making Swanna a Dawnstone evolution for female Psyduck would enhance them both, and it would avoid the criticism of just copying your previous Pokemon. But I guess that would have interfered with the whole reboot angle from Unova, so they never would have gone for that clear avenue of making an item useful outside of 2 in over 1,000 cases. At the very least, they could have made Clamperl evolve with the Dawnstone into either form instead of using 2 other single-use items. But whatever, that's far from the only way to do a new or branching evolution. I mean, just look at the Nidoran clan. And as we know, regular evolution is not off the table these days, so I think it would have been pretty easy to have Dondozo be a relative of another Pokemon, specifically Whiscash. Poor Whiscash really is one of the most overshadowed Pokemon out there, with its water and ground typing being on the starter of that same region, and it's pretty hard to find relative to other of those same Pokemon options in different games. So it's more than a little odd to see a new catfish Pokemon that has nothing to do with the unfortunate Whiskers Pokemon, and honestly I think Dondozo would slide in perfectly to become a well-deserved evolution. The design isn't really all that much more different from Whiscash than it is from Barboach, They're still unified in their fish with whiskers design. Yes, obviously Dondozo is pure water, but you could still just add the ground type no problem. And having this Pokemon attached to Whiscash would be a huge bonus because it got a spotlight as one of the few Titan Pokemon in the Path of Legends. We already saw Donphan Paradoxes get this honor, so why not let Whiscash in on that fun too? It may be a bit weird to have it be so heavily tied to Tatsugiri with the Commander ability, but once again that influence could be the catalyst for the transformation in Whiscash in the first place. Plus, it's not like we haven't seen Pokemon from different generations interact before. Now, for the next one, I know that nobody really has strong feelings about Flabebe, except maybe AZ, I guess, because despite Florges having some monstrous special defense, the first stage is mostly incidental, merely useful for figuring out what color you want it to be. But even then, in overworld encounters, the thing is so small that you can't even really tell what color it is anyway, so Flabebe just seems like a stepping stone on the way to something that you might actually want. I don't know that it would drive enthusiasm all that much, but I truly think that it would make all the sense in the world for Comfey to be related to these floral fairies. I'm envisioning them evolving straight from Flabebe because it's still relatively small, but you could see how the tiny Pokemon that only has stubby little hands and a short leg tail thing could turn into one that only has hands and a long tail thing. Especially since they're both obsessed with flowers to the point that they're basically a part of their body, yet they still stubbornly remain pure fairy types somehow. Plus, they could easily justify the split by having Comfey fully lean into the healing side of things as a cleric Pokemon, and have Florges prioritize being more offensively powerful. Basically, these Pokemon have to be related in some way, so they might as well admit it and include Comfey in the family lineup. I also think that we could believably see Gallade mixed in with the Charcadet evolutions as well, but I won't press it because it's not a fire type and it already has a lot going on with its own family. So instead, I would like to focus on Houndoom. This demonic dog has no adjacent Pokemon with which you can draw a direct comparison, but it is, however, probably the best example that I can think of Mega Evolutions being mishandled. Not to say that Mega Houndoom is bad, quite the opposite actually, that's my concern, because it has a wonderful design, and I truly think that it could be a believable next step in the line as an actual evolution. So many Megas couldn't possibly be evolutions to their base forms, and not just because many of them were a third stage already, but an Ampharos with hair is not a new Pokemon. Whereas Houndoom's Mega looks like a realistic next step in the line. I mean, just compare the light protrusions on the base Houndoom with the full-blown skeletal armor on the Mega. Not to mention the horns are totally different, making it look even taller than it was already, and the tail basically gets a double prong at the end. So in just about every way, the Mega is as much of a progression from Houndoom as it is from Houndour, so why is this not just a regular evolution again? It could have come in to give Sylveon some backup so it wasn't the only new evolution in Kalos, and even slipped into that dreaded 666 dex number instead of giving it to Vivillon for some reason. There are very few other Megas that could work. I could actually see maybe Camerupt, but probably Abomasnow as an actual evolution instead of a Mega. Or I guess Sandaconda's Gigantamax form could believably be an additional evolution too, but out of all the plain Pokemon out there, there's a glaring one that's had the opportunity to be connected to improvements, but was denied, which is a shame because Ledian is one of the Pokemon in the most dire need of assistance in something, anything. Ladybug was a neat little promotional tool for Johto. A Ladybug was an obvious missing candidate for the bug type, and it actually started as a flying type instead of evolving into one, but that's part of the problem. Bug and Flying is already an awful typing, and it doesn't really help that they're early route Pokemon, meaning that their base stats cap out at embarrassingly low levels. And with Ledian evolving at level 18, that means it struggles to contribute beyond the second gym, which is extra insulting when they try and base their designs on a superhero. But it makes absolutely zero sense to me for them to invent a new Ladybug Pokemon without any link to the one that they already had, who is begging for scraps and continually getting denied. Don't get me wrong, I like Orbeetle a lot, maybe more so than most, and I used one happily, but did they just forget they already had a Ladybug? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised since Ledian is pretty forgettable, but Orbeetle is a bit unique in that most of the other regional bugs evolved much earlier. However, Dottler doesn't evolve until level 30, so if you just stapled that onto Ledian instead, that would result in a pretty decent line. And actually, the numbers would perfectly mirror the Totodile line as a starter from Ledian's own region. Even the categories would line up, with the 5-star Pokémon turning into the 7-spot Pokémon, upping the number ever so incrementally. And again, I do love Dottler, but there's no way Blipbug makes sense to become a ladybug. They could have taken it in any direction, but instead they undercut a Pokémon that's needed a helping hand the most. Orbeetle could have easily been a part of the new wave of Galar evolutions by evolving straight from Ledian, giving it a much more powerful secondary typing to blast out to enemies, and probably not, but if it could have evolved into the Gigantamax form of this Pokémon, it would have been rad. So if Ledian could have turned into a UFO brimming with psychic power, people might have finally respected these pitiful ladybugs that have been slogging through every region they've seen since day one. And of course, there are plenty of other possibilities, but those are just some obvious Pokémon evolutions that could, and probably should, be considered to help bolster Pokémon that are too often overlooked. Which clearly missed evolutions would you most like to see in Pokémon? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.